Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a 3D animated movie released in 2018 by Sony Animation Studios to financial and critical acclaim, earning $374 million worldwide off a $90 million budget, and earning countless awards such as the World Soundtrack Awards, BAFTA Award for Best Animated Feature Film, Best Animated Picture for the Golden Globes, and the 2019 Oscar for Best Animated Film. In this video, I will be analysing the Watch the Hands scene from the end of the first act of the movie, and in doing so, I'll be discussing the 12 animation principles, how they blend together in this 3-minute scene to not only further the story of the movie, but the relationship between Peter and Miles. To help format this video with some cohesion, I will be going through the scene fairly chronologically with some short tangents to help prove my points, and show the 12 animation principles in all their glory. Exaggeration is used in animation because too much realism can ruin an animation, making it appear static and boring. It is used to make animations feel alive to the viewer, whether it's making bodies stretch unnaturally far in fight scenes, or to make an action character takes feel a lot more than it is. In our Spider-Verse scene, however, exaggeration is used to show the audience that Peter is using his spider senses, the same way every spider person has before him. Without this exaggeration, it may seem that Peter is guessing that Miles has spider abilities off a hunch at best. It is a great way to use exaggeration in a fairly subdued scene to get the point across that Peter can tell that Miles is a spider person. While all throughout this video you will see different usages of squash and stretch when Peter and Miles talk, their facial expressions will do it. However, there is no clearer indicator of squash and stretch in this scene than when Peter tries to escape his bonds. Peter tenses his body in an attempt to break free, he hurls his body against the binds, and we see that his body is stretching to inhuman-like proportions, which is perfectly replicated in the movement of the boxing bag behind him as he struggles. Anticipation is shown in this scene as Peter escapes. The camera very deliberately obstructs the view of Peter's hands when Peter says, "Don't watch the mouth." The viewer automatically asks themselves where his hands are. The use of anticipation in this scene, however, isn't just shown as when Peter shows his hands to Miles. The music slows down, everything else in the scene stops moving, and then Peter's hands come out from behind the box and he says, "Watch the hands," and kicks the boxing bag at Miles, knocking him across the room. This is so effective at building tension in the scene because once the audience begins to question if Peter is properly bound, they know something is about to happen to change the dynamics of the scene. A quote from Luc Pinot says that secondary actions are used to support or emphasize the main action going on within a scene. Nothing in this scene quite shows the power and importance of secondary action than when Peter kicks the boxing bag into Miles, knocking him across the room. Miles gets knocked so hard that he flies out of his shoe, which flies into the air and lands on him well after he's hit the ground. This little detail, while might possibly be missed on first viewing, gives the viewer a sense of stakes in the scene while comedically exaggerating the actions. For the next part of the scene, I'll be talking about timing, specifically how to use and break the rule in a consistent, believable fashion. After Peter's escape from Miles's prison, Peter climbs out the window and attempts to swing away, assuming one of the iconic Spider-Man poses. As he's about to take off, he shoots his web, jumps slightly off the rail, glitches out, and then falls down the side of the building into the fire escape below. The action and consequence of his jump are all there, but at the top of the jump, he breaks reality and floats unnaturally before falling down the side of the building. This is important because not only does it show that while superhuman, Peter does have to obey the laws of physics, but not necessarily when he's glitching out as a result of being from a different universe. Staging is to animation as shot composition is to filmmaking. Both are using the same camera techniques to guide the viewer into seeing the most important part of the shot, and one of the most common techniques used is the rule of thirds. While still remaining an interesting shot, the camera keeps Miles on the right side of the scene and Peter to the left to maintain to the audience their positions in the environment. When Miles starts to move in the background, there is a clear action line for Peter to get angry at Miles when he starts quoting Uncle Ben to Peter. When the shot reverses again to emphasize how upset Peter is, hearing Miles say, "With great power comes great responsibility," Peter is framed in the center of the screen to have him command attention. This sequence, while being essentially a conversation between two characters, is kept feeling fresh because the staging of the characters was interesting and cohesive. Pose-to-pose and straight-ahead action is one of the key processes used in creating believable and appealing animations. Generally, in 3D animation, characters are placed in poses to act in their scenes, usually when delivering dialogue. One of the simplest and yet most effective examples of pose-to-pose action is after Peter stands up after glitching out. He is leaning over the railing, talking to Miles about how he has a lot going on in his universe. In this pose, Peter moves back and forth, his face moves so that he can talk, but he feels resigned to stay in this pose, until Miles provokes him with quoting, "With great power comes great responsibility." This then prompts Peter to change into a new, more commanding pose over Miles, to drive home the point that he doesn't want to hear him say his uncle's last words to him. While there aren't many points of straight-ahead action in this scene, we can assume that the little things around the characters were animated to give the main objects life. For example, the bones hanging off the boxing bag or Miles' shoe falling on him after he gets kicked. Peter then demonstrates to the audience one of the most basic yet pertinent examples of follow-through and overlapping action in this scene. This time when Peter falls down the fire escape, he catches himself on a lower part and is left dangling while his body slowly stops moving. Follow-through is important here because it really shows the audience that Peter is grounded in reality, because if he just grabbed the railing and stopped motionless, the audience's immersion would break, causing discomfort and distrust. Arcs are all over this movie, namely when the spider people are swinging from building to building. In this scene, they are mostly very subtle and come out in each character's gestures. In the next few lines of Miles' dialogue, arcing in his animations is the most noticeable. The arcs used show Miles' sincerity in wanting to fix the problem to Peter, and are most notably portrayed by his arms, punctuating the words with actions. Firstly, pointing outwards towards the city in reference to Kingpin, and punching a full stop when Miles says he's trying to kill me. These actions by the character are meant to reinforce the severity of their situation, not only to their scene partners, but to the audience. And without arcing movements, animations would look clunky and unnatural because arcs are the most economical routes by which a form can move from one position to the other. Slow in and slow out is one of the most important aspects of basic animation. It helps determine the speed at which your object moves, and in turn, how your object should accelerate and decelerate. As Peter walks up the wall, throws the broken goober over his shoulder, Miles notices the goober falling and he has to take a leap of faith between the two buildings, while catching the goober along the way. Breaking down the shot, you can see that Miles is tracking the goober falling, his body anticipating his jump. To show off his speed, he's only spending a few frames not attached to a wall. This one action demonstrates clearly that even though Miles is performing a superhuman action, the audience believes that it's plausible because his movements don't break the laws of physics that would be needed to jump from wall to wall. A lot of speed and power. Appeal and strong drawing in animation is what makes a character understand what is happening in the scene aside from what the characters are saying. Visually, these aspects are hard to nail down, but in 3D animation, coalesces into interesting posing and quality of the character models. In this shot, Miles is taken aback at what Peter is doing. In this shot, Miles is excited and specifying that Peter can teach him how to be Spider-Man. And in this shot, it is a clear demonstration of Peter's mastery over his spider abilities, while showing that Miles is an amateur at best. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was a successful movie for many reasons. It had famous actors playing the characters, one of the most recognizable characters in modern history, a great score, hype for Spider-Man being in Civil War, and an interesting visual style from the jump. But even with everything that it had going for it, if the animators didn't adhere to the 12 animation principles in effective and interesting ways, it would have been shuffled off as yet another mediocre Spider-Man movie.